This is President Joe Biden. On August 18th, just 3 days after the fall of the government of Afghanistan and the start of the chaos that followed, Joe Biden addressed the nation.
I'd like to make an important announcement today in our work to get every American vaccinated and protected from the Delta virus, the Delta variant of COVID-19.
And this pissed a lot of people off. In this moment, Americans didn't want to hear about COVID. They wanted to hear President Biden take responsibility for the chaotic withdrawal and show some damn leadership.
Earlier today, our medical experts announced a plan for booster shots to every fully vaccinated American, adult American. You know, this will boost your immune response. It will increase your protection from COVID-19.
Except as of the date of this video being published, the need to get a booster shot for COVID was still being debated by public health officials and was still being researched by scientists.
Pending approval from the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC's Committee of Outside Experts will be ready to start this booster program during the week of September 20, in which time anyone vaccinated on or before January 20 will be eligible to get a booster shot.
And here lies the problem. The Biden administration, which promised to follow the science, is now setting its own artificial deadlines and making promises about a third shot boosting your immune system without data to back it up. During an August 30th presentation by the CDC's COVID Vaccine Committee work group, they stressed that they still needed data and regulatory approval. Here is Dr. Sarah Oliver.
The balance of benefits and risk for booster doses may vary by age and other factors. Any policy for booster doses needs to take this benefit-risk balance into account. And the work group emphasized that it's critical to wait for additional safety data and regulatory allowance for booster doses.
And this pressure by the Biden-Harris administration caused two of the FDA's top vaccine regulators to resign. Furthermore, members of the CDC's Independent Vaccine Advisory Panel voiced frustration with the Biden administration's booster shot plan, arguing that not only did it get ahead of federal regulators, but also that it could exacerbate vaccine hesitancy. Here's Dr. Sandra Adamson-Freihofer of the AMA during the advisory panel meeting.
When the White House or HHS made that September 20th availability, it led everyone, it led physicians, it led the public to believe that they had access to information about these vaccines and the need for boosters that had not yet been publicly released. And to me, that kind of opened the door to a lot of confusion.
And that's exactly right. The Biden White House clearly jumped the gun with their booster shot announcement. And since it looks like they're rushing things, it could lead to even more vaccine hesitancy. Great job, geniuses. So CNN's Dana Bash interviewed Biden's chief of staff, Ron Klain, about the booster policy and was surprisingly tough on him.
You all know President Biden promised to always follow the science, but in this case, did he get ahead of the science by setting that specific date for boosters before all the data was in?
No, Dan, I think what we said was that we would be ready as of the 20th, which was the projection we were given from the senior science team as to when the FDA would clear the boosters. What we want to do, though, is be ready as soon as that comes.
It's one thing to be prepared to distribute booster shots, just in case. It's another thing to make a grand announcement about it before the science is settled.
The country lived through a disaster in December when the FDA approved the vaccinations for the first time, but the administration had no plan to have enough vaccine on hand and to distribute it.
That's a lie. Ron Klain, who is one of the slimiest people in Washington, D.C., and now effectively runs the country, is a liar. First, he made the same claim back in January that the Trump administration didn't have a plan to distribute the vaccine. And that claim was quickly fact-checked and rated mostly false by PolitiFact. Oof, when you lose PolitiFact. Second, Ron Klain's claim that the Trump administration didn't purchase enough doses is also a lie. At the time, the goal was to vaccinate at least 70% of all eligible Americans 18 and over, which equaled 184.6 million. The Trump administration had ordered 200 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine and 200 million doses of the Moderna vaccine. When both were given emergency use authorization in December of 2020, that was enough to vaccinate more than 70% of the population. Furthermore, according to a January 28th report by the Government Accountability Office, the Trump administration had at least 800 million vaccine doses under contract expected to be delivered by July 31st, 2021, pending any issues with clinical trials, EUA assurance, and other factors. In other words, Trump had ordered more than enough.
Again, I think what the American people want to know is that rather than being lackadaisical about this, we are ready to go as soon as the approval for the boosters comes from the FDA and from the CDC. They will decide which of the vaccines are approved to be used as boosters. They will decide when that approval comes.
If approval comes from the FDA and the CDC, not when. Saying when suggests that it's a foregone conclusion when it's not. So much for being the party of science, huh? Anyway, recently Joe Biden held a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Bennett of Israel. And during that meeting, Biden was reading from notes on his lap.
And we've got a big agenda today, starting with COVID, which we've been talking about, and 19 in both our successful vaccination programs.
What?
COVID, which we've been talking about, and 19.
But before discussing COVID and 19, Prime Minister Bennett started droning on with the usual diplomatic pleasantries, during which this happened.
You've been so generous with your time in these difficult days. You and I are going to write yet another chapter in the beautiful story of the friendship between our two nations, the United States of America and the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. Both of us who seek to do good. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and you.
Now, was Biden dozing off? I mean, it sure looks like he was. But for the sake of argument, let's say that Biden was completely awake. Then that begs the question, if he was awake, why wasn't Joe respectful enough to look at the Prime Minister while he was being spoken to? But hey, at least he didn't look at his watch, right? Then, to mark the Jewish high holidays, Biden held a virtual call with several rabbis.
Hey folks, how are you? Michael, how you doing? Michael Beals, can you hear me? How's my rabbi?
My favorite president.
Oh, I tell you what.
Why are we wasting government resources on this? Couldn't he do this privately?
You all think I'm kidding. That's my rabbi.
My mom is really happy.
So is mine from up in heaven.
That's what you think, Joe.
If you can hear me and see me now, you're one of more than 1,000 rabbis and Jewish Americans who have gathered around phones and computer screens throughout the country for today's special and meaningful event.
I think that most people have better things to do than to watch a bunch of rabbis suck up to Joe Biden, but what do I know? Anyway, like most opportunities Joe Biden has to open his mouth, he made a very dubious claim.
I used to think,
That's debatable.
coming out of the civil rights movement and being involved in the Jewish community as a kid in the civil rights movement in Delaware.
Nope, fact check false. Joe Biden didn't come out of the civil rights movement. What's my source? Joe Biden.
During the 60s, I was, in fact, very concerned about the civil rights movement. I was not an activist. I worked at an all-black swimming pool in the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was involved in what they were thinking, what they were feeling. I was involved, but I was not out marching. I was not down in Selma. I was not anywhere else.
I should also point out that in the children's book Joey, the story of Joe Biden written by Dr. Jill Biden, there's not a single mention about Joey taking part in the civil rights movement. Although there is the claim that Joe led a walkout at a local diner when the owner refused to serve their black teammate, but that's hardly a sit-in, is it? I should also point out that there's no mention of when Joey threatened to beat Corn Pop to death with a chain, so...
And Corn Pop was a bad dude. And he ran a bunch of bad boys.
The book does, however, show him supposedly beating up 4 bullies at once, so clearly it's a work of fiction. So falsely claiming to have participated in the civil rights movement 60 years ago is one thing, I guess. But falsely claiming to have done something recently, that's another story.
It was, I remember spending time at the, going to the Tree of Life Synagogue, speaking with them. It just is amazing these things are happening.
Except that it was quickly pointed out by outlets like the New York Post and CNN of all places that Biden never actually visited the Tree of Life Synagogue, let alone spent time there.
President Biden is taking heat for falsely claiming that he visited the Pittsburgh synagogue attacked by a mass shooter when he never actually went there.
According to a statement from the White House to the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, Biden was referring to a call he had with the Tree of Life rabbi in 2019. No, he wasn't. You don't spend time at a phone call, and you don't go to a phone call. You know who did go to the synagogue and spend time there? President Donald J. Trump, but we're not allowed to give him credit for that. Now, Miranda Devine of the New York Post accused Biden of lying about going there to the synagogue and spending time there, and I disagree. I actually think he believes that he went there, which quite frankly is worse than lying. And speaking of visiting places, Vice President Kamala Harris traveled to Vietnam for some reason. And while in Hanoi, on the 3rd anniversary of Senator John McCain's death, Harris laid a bouquet of flowers next to the Truk Bach War Memorial. But let's take a closer look at this memorial. The text reads, "On October 26, 1967, the citizens and military caught pilot John Sidney McCain. The U.S. Naval Force aviator was flying aircraft A4, which crashed near Yanfu Power Station. This was one of 10 aircraft shot down that same day." The memorial also features a depiction of John McCain on his knees with his hands raised in the air, surrendering to the North Vietnamese. In other words, Harris didn't place flowers at a memorial honoring John McCain. She placed flowers at a memorial that celebrates his capture. A round of applause for Harris's crack team of advisors. You're doing God's work. And finally on our agenda, we circle back to Joe Biden, who, in the wake of Hurricane Ida, visited the New York, New Jersey area and spoke about how extreme weather has affected the United States.
It's all across the country. You know, the members of Congress know from their colleagues in Congress that, looks like a tornado, they don't call them that anymore.
Okay, let's break this down. Members of Congress know from other members of Congress that tornadoes that look like tornadoes aren't exactly called tornadoes anymore. It shouldn't hurt so bad hearing our commander-in-chief speak, but here we are. Anyway, I'm not sure what they're called now. Maybe climate crisis cones, or maybe something more gender inclusive like Tornadex.
We are determined that we are going to deal with climate change and have zero emissions, net emissions by 2050. By 2020, make sure all our electricity is zero emissions.
81 million votes, guys.
And it's not just whether or not people who are just trying to get by in these homes, in these alleys here, working their butts off, do well. It's people in high towers along the shore who find that as this rain and all this change takes place in the groundwater, the buildings are actually beginning to tilt. 100-story buildings.
Outside of not so subtly suggesting that people who live in high towers don't work as hard as lower class folks in Queens, Biden is saying that there are 100-story high buildings along the shore that are beginning to tilt.
100-story buildings.
Except for one thing. There are only 4 100-story buildings in the entire country, and only one of them is residential. In fact, every building taller than 1,200 feet are in New York and Chicago, so not quite on America's shoreline. Oh, and by the way, no, none of them are beginning to tilt.
And so folks, this summer alone, communities with over 100 million Americans, 100 Americans call home, have been struck by extreme weather.
So there's Americans, and then there's American Americans.
We've got to move, and we've got to move the rest of the world. It's not just the United States of America.
United States of America.
And on that note, thanks for watching, sharing, and slamming that like button. Be sure to check out these videos that you may have missed, and be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. And as always, I hope to see you next time. If there is a next time.